Carl Kiekhaefer was a true pioneer in the racing world, bringing vision and organization to the sport. His drivers won 52 of NASCAR's 101 races in 1955 and 56. But his success was his ultimate undoing. When NASCAR made it uncomfortable for the newcomer, he left the sport as suddenly as he had arrived.
He brought some discipline to the sport that we hadn't seen before.
When it came to team racing organization, clean facilities, big haulers, he had it all.
And he won. I mean, they were the fastest cars at every track for a couple of years there.
And people hated Kiekhaefer because he won so much, and they thought he was cheating, and France tore his cars down every race.
And Kiekhaefer himself, who had brought so much to the sport, became the enemy of the public, and the fans got to the point where they were booing him. He couldn't stand that, and he pulled out of the sport, and I think we're all the worse for it.
Bobby Allison and Darrell Waltrip, they had it bad for each other.
It seems like every race, either Waltrip is the dominant car or Allison is the dominant car.
Two of the sport's legendary drivers, Bobby Allison and Darrell Waltrip, often stood in each other's way in pursuit of championships. They finished 1-2 in the standings in 1981, 82, and 83, with Waltrip taking 2 of the 3 titles. They both retired with 84 victories, tied for 3rd all time.
We were very, very good friends. But once I kind of got to where I could rub fenders with old Robert Arthur, that seemed to create a little resentment.
Boy, that Waltrip is pushing Allison. He's all over him.
All of a sudden, when I got to where I could beat Robert Arthur, that really created some friction in the Waltrip and Allison families.
Bobby had been with Junior Johnson. That breakup had been nasty. And now Darrell was driving for Junior and winning the races and the championships.
We just became rivals, bitter rivals.
And I watched it carry on to the next generation with Davey.
As a matter of fact, there was a race at Pocono, and Darrell got into Davey, and Davey flipped, and he broke his arm. Darrell went on to win the race.
And it really annoyed me and put me on the defensive.
And I asked Bobby about it the next week. I said, what did you think? He goes, well, the same SOB that won the race with a big gas tank is the same SOB that broke my son's arm. And Darrell said, you know, Bobby blames me for everything. He said, Davey got a D in English in 8th grade, and Bobby said that was my fault too.
I believe that if I could have stayed there and communicated with Junior Johnson, we would have won lots of races and probably lots of championships.
Nobody knew more about race cars than Bobby Allison or Junior Johnson. But when they joined forces in 1972, the sparks flew. Things got so bad that any communication between the two had to go through crew chief Herb Knapp. The team split after 1 season, leaving both wondering, what if?
Should have had a long, long career together. I mean, they were made for each other, except that they couldn't stand each other.
Each of them had very different but very specific ideas of how the cars should be set up, how they should do things, how they should operate.
I've never seen him satisfied with any car owner. He's only satisfied when he's running his own car.
But I was really frustrated because I would say something to Junior and he wouldn't answer me. He'd turn and say something to Herb.
They didn't even speak to each other for weeks and months at a time. Finally, Bobby quit.
If he'd have stayed another year in Junior's car, maybe the whole thing would have been different.
If somehow they could have patched things up or found a way to work together, Bobby Allison might have won 200 races and not Richard Petty.
If anybody could make a car go fast, it was Smokey Yunick back in the old days.
He was a mechanical genius, but he was very much of a maverick, and he was not someone who responded well to authority figures.
Whether he was a crew chief, engine builder, or mechanic, the innovative Smokey Yunick was a main wheel in 57 victories. There was nothing he couldn't do to a car, or any rule he couldn't turn to his advantage. This led to an ongoing battle with NASCAR and its mastermind, Bill France.
Conniving side to Smokey Yunick that enabled him to cheat, as we call it.
He read the rule book and said, you know, it says we can only run a 22-gallon gas tank, but it doesn't say how big the fuel line going from the gas tank to the engine has to be.
He could make a car just a tad smaller than the standard size of that particular make and model, and that's going to go through the wind just a tick quicker. Well, that's all you need to win, is be just slightly quicker.
That's kind of how it went. Smokey would come up with something, and NASCAR would try to catch him, and sometimes they would, and sometimes they wouldn't.
By getting by with something, I think he got more enjoyment out of that than he did if he was winning something legitimately.
I think one reason that Dale Earnhardt and Geoff Bodine clashed.
Bodine and Earnhardt are nearly side by side down the backstretch as Bodine and Earnhardt slug it out.
They always felt like each other was invading their turf.
Dale Earnhardt now pressing up on the rear bumper of Geoff Bodine.
Blue-collar Southerner against brash Northerner was the essence of the Dale Earnhardt and Geoff Bodine rivalry. The seeds of their discontent were planted in the 1986 Daytona 500 when Earnhardt ran out of gas, opening the door for the victorious Bodine. The feud got so hot that a ceasefire had to be negotiated by NASCAR kingpin Bill France.
Bodine was another one of these guys that had kind of broken the mold. He wasn't a native Southerner. He was from Chemung, New York.
And so when Geoff got to the South, you know, he just thought like, okay, they're not going to give me an inch, so I've got to take whatever I get. And he didn't back down from anybody.
They got pretty intense on the racetrack too, and you know, almost like when you knew they got close to each other, you knew something was going to happen.
And Earnhardt and Bodine come together as they come out of number 2. Guys are beginning to play rough. Let's watch them close.
Most drivers, you know, Dale Earnhardt come up behind him, they look in the rearview mirror and they might pull over real quick, or they might give him a little bit of extra room. Geoff Bodine wasn't into that at all. Geoff's going to mess right back, and it seemed to play out like that race after race.